Warning, this chapter contains adult content, so I have recorded that in a separate video for the members only. Indomitable Heart by Renette. Chapter 11. When Obi-Wan and Anakin were deployed, it was, as Master Windu had suggested, to Kamino. They had the notes for where the system ought to be, and Jan's fragmented flight logs to help them on their way. It would hopefully get them where they needed to be. They also had strict instructions that they weren't to go herring off on any ancillary missions before returning to Coruscant and reporting in person to the Council on the army the Republic had evidently ordered 10 years prior through a now dead master of their own order. Flying a pair of either Sprite Delta 7 interceptors, travel time to the Rishi maze was a full standard week. Obi-Wan read through their information repeatedly in hyperspace, his mind snagging on the huge gaps Jan had left. His master had clearly censored his reports. The holes were big enough to drive a judicial cruiser through. It made Obi-Wan extremely nervous. While Jan had always been cautious, this went beyond, bordering on paranoia. Well, there it is. Anakin's voice came over comms when they reverted to real space over a watery blue orb. From the limited telemetry Dooku had sent back, it was an ocean planet with a breathable atmosphere. All flag sweep. Anakin volunteered before Obi-Wan could request his Padawan remain airborne. On missions like this, it was best for one of them to stay aloft as backup in case of emergency extraction, and Obi-Wan was, if only slightly, less likely to commit a diplomatic gaffe that would get him detained. I would appreciate it, Obi-Wan admitted. Full scanner sweep and so forth, you know the first contact drill, even if this isn't actually first contact. Affirmative, Anakin agreed. With the database record purged, Master Nu had all but demanded they gather all necessary information for a new entry to be inserted in the archives. If we need additional backup, the Daybreaker is only a few days away on standby, Obi-Wan reminded. I would prefer not to involve them in this mess, but they're closer than the Order. I'll have R4 relay my sensor information and be back in touch in a few hours. Alright, how long should I give you before I contact the Daybreaker and the Order? Anakin asked, and Obi-Wan chuckled. It was true that lately their missions went south more often than not. Anakin had gained skills at a rapid pace through necessity. Best to know in advance what the cutoff was. 12 hours without contact, Obi-Wan said after a little consideration. I don't think it will be that long, though I may ask you to stay aloft for a while longer. That's fine. Better I stay up here than put my foot in my mouth down there, Anakin said, and Obi-Wan could almost see his nonchalant shrug. His Padawan might be charming, but a mediator he was not. All right, I'll be in touch soon, Obi-Wan said with confidence he didn't fully feel, then began his approach. The inhabitants were clearly expecting someone from the transmissions he soon picked up. Perhaps Jan had warned them that he would be back, or that someone else would follow. Either possibility was an option. Obi-Wan just ensured that Anakin was receiving everything as well, then followed the landing instructions to Tipoca City. He was directed to an exposed circular landing pad in a built landscape of pale glossy domes. For a few moments he just sat in his cockpit doing checks he usually left to the astromech. The lashing rain was not a particularly welcoming environment, and it didn't appear anyone was waiting on him. After a bit more avoidance, Obi-Wan opened his cockpit envelope with a disgruntled sigh and dashed through the rain to the nearest lit entryway, glad that his armor was somewhat waterproof. It didn't feel quite like a trap, but that didn't always mean it wasn't a trap. Maybe not a trap, Obi-Wan decided when he'd been led to meet with the Prime Minister, but still something unwelcome. And then they proudly showed Obi-Wan the army they'd created for the Jedi, and he was looking at his husband's face, thousands of times over younger than he'd ever known Jango. The genetic source of the clones? Obi-Wan asked in his most ingratiating tones, as if he wasn't joking that fury hot enough to boil his blood. A bounty hunter, the Kaminoan guiding him said dismissively. As we told Master Dooku, we requested Master Sifo-Dyas let us clone a Jedi, but he was insistent that this would be sufficient. Obi-Wan was glad he had his helmet on. He couldn't keep his disgust from his face and was unsure how well a Kaminoan might be able to decipher human facial expressions and link them to the underlying emotions. He was beginning to doubt, as he thought his master might have, that Sifo-Dyas had ever set foot in the same quadrant as Kamino, never mind on the planet. If a Jedi had truly perpetrated this horror, Obi-Wan no longer wished to claim the title for himself. "And what has happened to this bounty hunter?" Obi-Wan asked, pushing past his disgust.
"He has remained here with us,"
the Kaminoan said. Anything else the Kaminoan said was inaudible over the blood thundering in Obi-Wan's ears. Here! His beloved was here! Jan would have known, and Jan had hidden that from him. Why? Why hadn't Jan put that in his report? Had he not trusted Obi-Wan to contain himself, or was there something more insidious at work? "I would meet this man," Obi-Wan declared, feeling as though he were speaking around all the sand on Tatooine lodged in his throat.
"Of course,"
the Kaminoan acceded, and Obi-Wan followed along the curving, colorless corridors, his heart hammering in his chest. It didn't take long for his sense of direction to be thoroughly confused. The place was a labyrinth, and if there were distinguishing characteristics on any of the walls, neither Obi-Wan's eyes nor his helmet's HUD were picking up on them. He was recording and mapping everything so he could build a layout of the city once he linked into the terminal. "Anakin?" Obi-Wan said into his in-helmet comm when he thought he could speak without going into hysterics. "Jango's here. I need you to let the Daybreaker stay aloft for now and tell them that if they come, remain out of sensor range for the moment. I don't have enough of the picture yet." "On it, Orivru," Anakin promised grimly, and Obi-Wan cut the transmission, hoping it had gone unnoticed by the hosts. Jango. Here. Obi-Wan's mind ceaselessly circled the idea. How long? Was it the Kaminoans who'd captured Jango? That seemed unlikely. There was nothing in what Obi-Wan had seen that would indicate they were a warlike race themselves, and it would have taken a great deal of skill to capture Jango. There was at least one more party involved then. Sifo-Dyas? Had the old prophet truly fallen? Or had someone else used his name to their own ends? Few would question a being claiming to be a Jedi on a mission. As they reached the residential part of the facility, the massive transparisteel viewports looking out over the cloning facilities and training grounds gave way to more closely placed doors, each boasting a biometric sensor restricting access. Obi-Wan couldn't help but note the higher level of security. The offices they had spoken in earlier had been secured only by sleek pressure pads, with no evidence of biometric sensors. The access pads here were larger and more complex, requiring a numeric code as well as chip verification, and boasted gleaming camera eyes to monitor who was accessing the area. It wasn't quite like a detention center, but it was clear that the residents were likely there under some degree of duress. His heart clenched. Had they harmed Jango before keeping him captive and isolated from his family and people? The Kaminoans didn't seem vicious, but they clearly didn't abide by the same moral code as most of the rest of the galaxy if they were willing to conduct full sentient cloning. Their aversion to humans seemed to stem from a feeling of aloof superiority rather than other, more violent types of disdain. Even so, Obi-Wan didn't want to underestimate their contempt and have it blow up in his face. They reached a door indistinguishable from those flanking it, and Obi-Wan's guide tapped out an access code on the security pad. Obi-Wan tried to see the order of the digits, but a data chip was pressed into the slot, and he knew that wasn't something he could fake. The Kaminoan, Obi-Wan realized he did himself and this guide a disservice by not bothering to remember their name, but he could hardly remember his own name at the moment, alerted the residents. Jango's residence. Here. The door opened, and there was Obi-Wan's beloved. The recognition in Jango's eyes was instant, even as he kept his bare face as immobile as possible. But those familiar dark eyes knew Obi-Wan immediately. Obi-Wan was sure of it, even though the markings on his Beskar gam had been repainted a time or two since their last meeting. Jango looked worn, tired. He was dressed in soft, loose clothing, and Obi-Wan suspected Jango had been kept separate from anything that might resemble armor or weapons. Otherwise, he would either be free or visibly injured from escape attempts. Jango had gained a bit of weight, and Obi-Wan found he liked the softness it gave his Riduur. Jango's frame had always been solidly built, but now there was a bit of fat over the thick muscle. What he didn't like, though, was the stress that lined Jango's face. Every year between them, every year they'd been separated, was graven into Jango's skin.
Tonwe,
Jango greeted coolly.
this Jedi wished to meet you.
Tonwe said, gesturing at Obi-Wan as if the Jedi were little more than an annoyance. I am Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan introduced himself with a slight bow, as if Jango didn't know him better than almost anyone. I have a few questions for you.
Jango Fett.
Jango introduced himself with an almost imperceptible dip of the head to indicate he understood and would play along with the falsehood of not knowing one another.
I'm happy to answer questions for you.
He paused, cocking his head slightly.
I'm sure you have more important things to do, Tonwe. I could come you when the Jedi and I have finished talking.
It wasn't exactly a command. Obi-Wan was fairly certain Jango didn't have that type of power here, but the combination of Jango's dismissive tone and the appeal to the Kaminoan's sense of superiority seemed to do the trick. Tonwe hesitated a moment, then nodded and showed themselves out of the apartment. While they had been introducing themselves and while Tonwe decided whether or not to leave them alone together, Obi-Wan had been running every counter-surveillance tool in his Beskar. Every sweep came up clean. Either Jango's apartment wasn't monitored, or it wasn't monitored in any way he could detect. As soon as the door closed and he sensed they were alone, Obi-Wan almost threw himself at his husband, hugging Jango tightly before tearing off his boucher to kiss him desperately. Jango kissed back eagerly, clutching Obi-Wan, closed fingers scrabbling over smooth armor plating as he tried to pull Obi-Wan even closer. It had been years since they had seen one another, and while Obi-Wan had refused to give up hope, refused to believe his husband was dead, that didn't mean finding him was any less unexpected. Missed you, Obi-Wan murmured in between, peppering Jango's face with kisses, each exhalation forming Jango's name on his lips. Missed you so much, Jango.
Missed you too, Sharika.
Jango breathed back.
I don't know if they'll let me go.
Explain it to me. About gave me a heart attack when I saw all your boys down there.
Got a job through a contact. Coordinates to meet on one of the moons of Bogdan. I messed up, got cocky. Didn't think anything of it when the client asked me to take off my boucher for visual confirmation after I beat out Montrose in competition for the contract. Woke up here. They must have kept me out for a while because they handed me a baby as soon as I woke up. Told me he was my son and I'd cooperate if I wanted him to grow up safe and healthy.
Jango explained, quiet and angry. Obi-Wan's protective instincts flared as well. We'll find a way, Obi-Wan promised. I've picked up an Adiik of my own, he admitted. Jango raised an eyebrow and questioned. Padawan, name of Anakin Skywalker, you remember him? He teased with a smile. He's nearly a knight already, and his mother's been taken into the clan. The Daybreaker is likely already on the way here, although I told them to stay out of sensor range. Jango grinned bravely. He definitely remembered Obi-Wan talking about the little blonde terror that Ayla and Quinlan had picked up on Tatooine.
I don't get much freedom, but I know they have a bunch of Mando'a training the army. Some of them are soldiers I might be able to trust. Some of them were in Vizsla's faction.
Jango said with a low growl in his voice. Obi-Wan bristled at the name. Death Watch was still a threat to the peace of Mandalore, despite the work the hot Mando'a had undertaken to dismantle the organization. Not as much of a threat as they once had been, but still a threat nonetheless.
My Aliit?
Jango asked. Obi-Wan was unsurprised. Family was everything to Jango. Never more than a call away, Obi-Wan promised. They've done well in your absence. Miles has been running the search for you from the end, while Silas keeps the company in business and Arla keeps the home fires burning. They've always believed me when I say you live yet, and they keep the others in line. I'm going to get you out of here, Jango. You and our ad.
How many are they, my ad?
Jango asked, his voice strained.
Can we evacuate all of them?
Millions. And some are still in tubes, Obi-Wan said with a shake of the head. There's no way we can fit them all on the Daybreaker, and officially they're the Grand Army of the Republic. Property! Jango grimaced but dipped his head in acknowledgement. He'd find a way to get his Ade free. He just had to find a plan. For now, there wasn't anything he could do, and he had Obi-Wan back in his arms.
There's Shetika,
Jango murmured fondly and kissed his husband slow and deep, burning this moment into his mind.
Riduur.
Obi-Wan flushed but kissed Jango back without hesitation. The relief of being with Jango once again was nearly overwhelming. His concerns over the clones and their mysterious origin, and the ominous military creation act still raced in the back of his mind. But holding Jango, kissing Jango, anything seemed possible when they were together. Neither could bear even the thought of separation for long minutes. Their kisses and touches softened, heads nuzzling together so they could just breathe one another in, hands mapping and shaping the planes and curves of their muscles and the hard jets of bone under their skin. Obi-Wan traced the familiar lines of Jango's Sur'atiin, his fingers mapping genealogy and promises, bonds of blood and choice inked under Jango's skin.
"I've missed you,"
Jango rasped, leaning up to kiss Obi-Wan's Sur'atiin. Obi-Wan could only nod, pressing himself tighter against Jango. Jango just held him as Obi-Wan finally let the tears come, years of stress and hope and fear washing from him.
"Yon was here,"
Obi-Wan said later, when they could separate themselves a little, could think of something other than the desperate relief of being together again. Jango nodded, glancing over at the repainted pauldron where it lay with the rest of Obi-Wan's hastily shed armor.
"He's gone, isn't he?"
Jango asked. Obi-Wan nodded.
"Taab'echaaj'la,"
Obi-Wan confirmed.
"They killed him on Geonosis."
Jango shuddered, well aware of the type of death Yan would have faced there.
"With a couple of the other trainers, I'd pieced together some things,"
Jango said quietly, hands moving restlessly over Obi-Wan's skin.
"Most of them are here willingly. They're mercenaries and pay is good, plus it's a ball they can't be traced back to. But some of them are sadistic bastards. I stopped the fighting ring. One of them was running by breaking the Hutton's skull. Since then, I've been restricted to quarters except when they need me in the lab for a new sample. Earlier on, they let me train some of the Adiik, but only the one group. I trained them 2 Mando'a, 2 independent for the longnecks. Kyr'tayl is here too. He's got his own gang of ornery muscleheads. He's all but adopted them, I think, but I haven't been able to talk to him."
Obi-Wan snorted at that. He knew Kyr'tayl, but not well, and hadn't seen the man in years. Not since shortly after Jango disappeared.
"Oh, Adiik, tell me about him?"
Obi-Wan asked, and a true smile, warm and fond, broke over Jango's face.
"His name is Boba,"
Jango said, and told Obi-Wan all about his son. "Lucky," Obi-Wan translated mentally. "A good name." Jango had shared tales of Obi-Wan with Boba too, when he could bear to speak about his Riduur.
"He'll be home soon from lessons. He does basic schooling with the others. This is not quite like having brothers. They grow so much faster than him, but I think it helps them. And him. They see they're not so different, and since I've taught him that they're his brothers, he tries to teach them that too, so does he can. It's not much, not damn near enough, but it's something." "You'd claim them all if you could,"
Obi-Wan said with quiet understanding. Jango nodded, eyes sad.
"I would,"
Jango agreed.
"I have, despite that I barely know them, despite that they're decanted by the batch. They're my Adiik."
Obi-Wan hugged Jango close, his heart breaking again with the sheer scale of this atrocity.
"We'll figure it out,"
Obi-Wan promised.
"They're mine too now."
Jango gave a wan smile at that, nuzzling close to Obi-Wan and breathing him in. He steeled himself and began telling Obi-Wan all the horrors that Yan had omitted from his reports. How the clones were tested and vetted from the embryonic stages. How those the Kamino scientists deemed defective were culled. Jango wasn't sure if they were killed outright or experimented on, but they weren't ever seen again. Those whose defects were only visible later on were culled as well. Again, Jango wasn't sure if that meant death or something else. Neither option was particularly palatable, but it was clear that the Kaminoans didn't hold humans in high regard to start with, and the clones were merely product to them, not even in the same class as natural-born humans. Obi-Wan found the mindset wholly repulsive.
"What would count as defective to them?"
Obi-Wan asked, not entirely certain he wanted to know, but needing to prepare himself.
"This is rumor and hearsay, not fact,"
Jango warned. Obi-Wan nodded, his understanding.
"As you know, some of my ancestors had interesting taste in mates. So, although I look my non-human, genetically I'd be better classified as near-human. Some defective clones are those that exhibit the non-human DNA to a greater degree than I do. They have fur, or non-human standard eyes, or ears that come to a point, or any number of other attributes that are seen as other than human. Others were deemed defective for being female. I've heard rumours that there were a few Force-sensitive clones culled not long after decanting. Some are deemed defective for being too aggressive, others not aggressive enough. Various developmental differences that would simply see them given a personalised education if they were born on any Republic or Mando'a world. Even physical deformities that are usually easily ameliorated, like cleft palate.
Force! Obi-Wan breathed, grinding the heels of his hands against his eyes until he saw stars.
There's reasons I don't get to interact with them much,
Jango said grimly.
When I first heard about the culling, I broke a Kaminoan's neck. I would have killed a few more of them if it wasn't for the chip.
Chip! Obi-Wan commanded, and Jango angled his head, touching an unremarkable patch of skin at the side of his neck.
Subdermal. I don't know its full capabilities, just that it packs enough punch to knock me unconscious. When they've knocked me out with it, my head aches for days, leaves me weak and nauseous, like taking a bad blow to the head. It's small enough I can't feel it, otherwise I'd have tried to cut it out already and damn the consequences.
Jango admitted. Obi-Wan narrowed his eyes, reaching out to run his fingers over that same bit of skin. Jango shivered at the feather-light touch, and then his eyes widened in surprise when he felt a slight pinch beneath his skin.
Did you just disable your chip?
Obi-Wan finished, guilelessly, eyes wide with magnificence. Jango barked out a laugh of startled delight, then leaned in to kiss his Riduur deeply.
If they've chipped you, though, I'm not sure I want to know what methods of control they visited on the Adiik. We'll find out. Disable it too.
Jango promised firmly, and Obi-Wan nodded his agreement. They curled back together, clinging to one another, stocking up the sensation in case they couldn't find a way to get Jango free of this watery world.
Anakin is flying Overwatch, and I should contact him soon,
Obi-Wan said after a bit more snuggling.
I'll tell him to stay aloft for now. I'm hoping to find a place where he can land unobserved and get into the service, slice all the information they'll keep from me.
Jango nodded, racking his mind. He hadn't been permitted to wander much. The Kaminoans kept a close eye on their walking gene bank. The other bounty hunters who made up the training corps had much more freedom, coming and going as they pleased in their free time. Then again, they had been paid to disappear for a while. Jango had never imagined he was signing on for this when he'd agreed to compete against Montrust for a bounty.
I'm not sure I'll be much help to you, Jango admitted, but Boba will be back soon. You'll stay for late meal? I'll stay as long as you think I can without arousing suspicion, Obi-Wan promised. We'll find a way to get you and Boba out of here, even if I have to smuggle you into my ether sprite.
Jango smiled at that, and they finally got up and dressed, although Obi-Wan didn't put his full armor back on, just the armor-weave jumpsuit. They spent the remaining time until Boba's return talking about the years of their separation, the things Obi-Wan had seen and done, and about Boba and Anakin and whether they'd get along. They stayed close together as they talked, touching one another at the slightest provocation, linking hands and leaning into one another's sides, watching each other and trying not to blink. Boba burst into the apartment with an energy level Obi-Wan remembered well from when he'd first met Anakin, babbling a mile a minute in Mando'a about his lessons and his brothers, including one named 99 who had walked him home from his lessons. He stopped short when he saw Obi-Wan sidling around to Jango and crowding close to his father's other side. Jango ruffled his Adiik's hair gently.
Ibic, Riduur Obi-Wan,
Jango introduced gently. Oribru? Boba asked, his little hand fisted tight on Jango's tunics, dark eyes wary.
Megar copaani,
Obi-Wan said, and not wanting to push himself further into Boba's life than the child was able to accept. It would be a process learning to fit themselves into a family.
Aliit ori'shya tal'din,
Boba said solemnly and offered his hand.
Ni kyr'tayl guy,
Boba Fett. Obi-Wan returned just as solemnly. It wasn't the full adoption, but it was acknowledgement of their bond through Jango, who grinned proudly. Boba remained a bit wary, but he did warm up a bit when he and Obi-Wan helped Jango prepare their simple meal. Seared fish and roast vegetables over a bed of steamed niral with a salad made from what must have been a native seaweed. Other than the salad, it wasn't terribly unlike what Obi-Wan and Jango had eaten so long ago in kyr'tayl. Obi-Wan recalled the memory fondly, and he and Jango spent much of the meal reminiscing about the time they had spent living out of the Oyubat. When the meal had long finished, and Boba had been put to bed with a few stories of Obi-Wan's adventures over the past years, Obi-Wan checked in with Anakin again, then regretfully nodded to Jango, who calmed Ton Wei to come escort Obi-Wan back to his guest quarters. Obi-Wan had stayed perhaps overlong already, but he rationalized that they could have been talking for hours, and he had learned a great deal more about the cloning program. With a sigh, Obi-Wan buckled on his armor back on, then said goodnight to Jango. As he embraced Jango, he pressed a small disposable comm into his husband's hands. "Por oribru," Obi-Wan murmured and felt Jango's hand tighten around his fingers in silent acknowledgement. "Koyasi," he commanded, and then the door was chiming, and he had to let Ton Wei lead him away.